Welcome to the Voice of Reason. I'm Dr. Len Saputo here with Francesco Garapoli. Hi,
Hey, Len.
Francesco.
How are you doing, Len?
Doing good. Listen, I've been thinking about things, and there's some questions about COVID-19 that just don't add up to me. And I'm just wondering what you think about them, too. I don't know how the government knew what was happening in January, way back when nobody really thought this was going to be a big deal, even though this thing was happening in China. I'm not sure what was going on. How did they know that?
Before there was really conclusive evidence from China, especially when China held back a lot of information in the beginning, in
Right.
less than a month, somebody had the idea that this was going to be something big.
I
And these
know.
are these are questions a lot of people ask. I mean, we have no answers, but it's important to ask these questions.
I know. I was thinking, when the thing happened in China, they have 2 or 3 million deaths from pneumonia every year. 2 or 3 million. They're not talking about 3,500 deaths. Why in the world, for that, would they shut down a whole city of Wuhan and convince the rest of the world that they should shut down? I mean, they must have known something we didn't know.
Especially when Wuhan, China, a city of 11 million people, and a gigantic city, also houses the number 1 biological research
It's a
labs.
level 4 lab, which is the most dangerous of all.
Highest security and typically associated with military
Right,
in most countries.
right.
So this is a very curious combination of information that I think we need to ask. We need to really get to the core of what's going on here.
I think you're right. A lot of people have been talking about how this virus might have been bioengineered, and I don't like thinking that way, and I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but that would be something that would potentially fit to explain what happened. Because if China knew they did that, and somehow the rest of the world knew that too, but they didn't tell us, and none of the governments really told us, then it would make sense that they would do the things that they did out of a sense of urgency and to protect us. But the mistake is they left us out of the equation. We're sitting there hanging, wondering why now? There are only 3,500 deaths in China. They shut the place down. They put people behind bars in hospitals. I mean, it was what we saw in the news here was gruesome, and some of it was a setup. I saw some things that just really didn't seem right. They had one view of a whole courtyard of people who were faking having seizures, and they're all having seizures at the same time. And as a doctor, I know that's just baloney. It's that people don't all, like 200 people having a seizure at the same time. So there was a lot of misinformation that was put out there. But this is one thing that could explain why we were sitting in the position we were and why the government did what it did.
There's too many pieces that don't come together, and when we start putting these pieces together, it really, I think, could help us understand where we are in this, right? The most important thing is that we get out of this fear mode because we think that nature is going awry. But when we start to understand that maybe something behind it was quote unquote engineered in some way,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, that means we have a chance to fix things and not to really be afraid, but to move from an empowered place.
Yeah, well, that's really right. And people are thinking about all this 5G technology we have. There's so much hype about it. But when you really study it, we don't have a lot of research on it. We don't know what it's going to do to our body in some ways, but we do know that it's going to do some bad things to us that are for sure, that have been proven by scientific literature. For example, we know that the mitochondria, those energy producing packets that are in our cells, we got thousands of them in every cell. They make the energy that the body needs. It's called ATP. And if we don't have enough of that ATP, we're in trouble in terms of trying to sustain bodily function. And in every serious disease, you always see a reduction in ATP as as the primary things. So we know that the 5G technology is going to lower the production of energy. And while by itself we can't prove that it does anything, it's going to make our reserves go down. And those reserves are what are helping to keep us healthy. We don't have those healthy reserves. You need some different things to happen. Maybe you need a virus. Maybe you need to have enough energy. Maybe you need to have some other environmental impacts on what's happening. There's genetic factors. And you add them all up, and then you put 5G on top of it. Would that be enough to throw us over the top? It's an interesting thought.
And that's how we need to look at these things, Len, is not these conspiracies that say 5G is the reason we're having this,
Exactly.
or another conspiracy says one thing or another. The more important thing is to look at how every one of these contributes to us, right? This whole
Exactly.
show is about healthcare. It's a view on healthcare. So we got to look at our own personal health
And doing it
and
reasonably,
doing
somehow,
it reasonably.
where's the balance? We got people on one end who are conspiracy theorists that scare the heck out of everybody. And then we got other people who are sitting on it saying, well, you have to do these things because this is a terrible pandemic and this is the only way you can solve it.
Right. And I think either of those extremes is disempowering. Okay, if you get
Exactly.
too angry and believe it's all a conspiracy, your stress is going to go up. And the anger in your heart is not going to serve you. If, on the other hand, you're completely complacent and you don't ask any questions, then equally there's a part of you that's being shut down that's not healthy.
No, you're right. And look what it's doing to our lives. We're all shut down. And how do we get the whole world to shut down? Just all of a sudden, it was back in January when it was first happening, and there were only 30 or 40, deaths in the U.S. and maybe a few hundred cases. We shut this down. The UK shut down. Most of Europe shut down. A lot of places shut down. And look at the impact that has on people and how they feel, and how they're going to spend their lives.
Were the facts clear enough as a physician like you are to warrant that kind of thing? Was there such a rampant disaster at hand? Was there enough medical facts that would suggest this?
Well, they weren't facts that we knew. They were
Hmm.
facts that maybe the governments knew. And the part of it that's really interesting to me is that the whole world went along with it.
That's the point. And the curious thing is, it didn't seem like there was enough information that would make that type of thing happen. It seemed like
Exactly.
there's got to be something else behind it. And these are the things that a lot of people ask.
Yeah, I
There's,
agree.
you brought up the numbers before of the influenza virus that happens every season. And if people looked at those deaths in comparison to this COVID, it would be a much scarier story, I think. The numbers are
That's
a lot
true.
higher.
But what's interesting is they're starting to catch up. We're now at over 20,000 deaths in this country. And maybe influenza's got a considerable number more, but now we got a sizable number here. And the part that's frustrating for me is the not knowing and seeing how this thing is unfolding the way it is and changing my life and changing the life of our culture in a way that's frustrating. And it gives you anger and fear, and then we're separated and isolated, at least physically. Boy, that's powerful stuff.
It's
Makes you
really good.
wonder what's happening from the point of view of the whole world's participation.
Yeah. And we know from stories about what's happening to individuals. And we're being stressed. The average person isn't really prepared for heavy stress in their life. We know that. That's why stressors lead to disease.
That's
We're
right.
hitting now in this new program of shutdown, quarantine, lockdowns, and so forth, are hitting so many of the stressors of an average person. It's getting overwhelmed, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. And who's sleeping well? You know, you you're not doing that much during the daytime because we're on lockdown basically. And when it comes time to go to bed, the mind starts wandering, and it's hard to turn it off. It's hard to accept the kind of thing that's happening because it doesn't seem like we're getting the whole story here, and it makes it that much scarier. So it would be better, I think, if we were told the truth that made sense about
Mhm.
what's going on, rather than leaving it to us to try and invent things that are possibilities. I don't want to
Yeah.
do that. I want to have faith in my country, in my government, and I want to have faith in the people of the world as being wanting to develop community and to spend our time that would be peaceful and fruitful, not like this.
Yeah, very true. Getting the truth, even if it's hard to swallow, gives people a certain sense of comfort and trust. And when we have comfort and trust, we work together. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do in this series is get enough information out so our viewers like us can start to put together a sense of peace within us when we know enough good information and ask the right questions.
Yeah, well, If we had that kind of communication, and we were really built in open honesty and community, this would be a lot different. But I mean, some of the things that don't make sense. Why are we locking down everybody in the country? Why don't we just lock down those people who are the most vulnerable and by far are creating the highest incidence of deaths? So it should be the people that are over 65 and people who have immune deficiencies of some kind that put them at risk for it. Why isn't that happening?
It's a good question. When statistically and from a common sense standpoint, that would make a lot more sense. And people following best practices in stores, and we're seeing a lot of good things happening right now when you go out shopping and people are distancing themselves and so forth. But why is this being made on such a global, complete shutdown, complete lockdown? These are really good questions.
Yeah. And how about the question of vaccines? Everybody wants a vaccine. I do too. I think vaccines are a great thing if they're good vaccines and vaccines that you can trust. But with all the mistrust that's going on with the government now and the bickering between the Democrats and the Republicans, I mean, that is the most amazing thing to me, to see how all the Democrats are thinking one way and all the Republicans are thinking another way. And it makes you wonder who's really thinking with the voice of reason. It's like they have a policy they're going to follow. It's about who's going to get elected in a few months. That seems to be more important than what's actually happening to us.
Well, I hope all the viewers can really go inside and say, when it's time to vote, the next cycle that comes around, that you really will think how your local politicians have voted and have acted during this process.
Well, that's really right. Well, look at the mess that will make from the point of view that a little bit of, I mean, if a few Democrats voted like Republicans and a few Republicans did it like Democrats, then there would be some kind of belief that there's some logical sense to it other than politics and economics and health. I mean, health's thrown in there for sure, but not in an honest way that's open and clear.
Yeah, no kidding. And that engenders mistrust in the average person. And I really am concerned about the teenagers and the young millennials.
Oh, for sure.
They're looking at this now very carefully. They may not be saying too much, but they're watching and observing and kind of checking into themselves as, what kind of world do I want to grow up in? So yeah. I think this is a big factor that no one's really talking about.
Well, from my point of view, and I'm sure yours too, we got to make America strong again. We have to build confidence that we can trust our government. We have to be able to see the political system looking at both sides and people voting with their hearts, not with their agendas for re-election. We do those things, then there won't be the secrets that are out there that cause the mistrust, the shutdowns, the isolation, the depression, the sense of helplessness that comes from all this. So we've got a lot of questions that just don't add up. And it's good that we're talking about them and preparing ourselves and everybody else for it. So thank everybody for listening today on The Voice of Reason. And we'll be back again tomorrow, so tune in.